What is going on, everyone? So in this week's video, I want to share something that I created here, which is a little tally of the number of photos I have in my portfolio from Zion during the fall by year. And I thought about this because, I just returned from my fall trip to Zion. And this was my 17th consecutive year visiting there during the fall. I'd been there before, all the way back to the 80s as a kid. But during the fall, 2009 was my first year. And on every single one of those visits from 2009 through this year, I spend somewhere between 7 and 10 days in the park. And so I think it's kind of interesting to see how these numbers change. So I went ahead and made a list. I'll put it right here. And let's kind of go through it and see how things have changed through the years. So 2009, my first visit, I have no photos from that trip that I'm satisfied with. But I went back a year later in 2010, and that is where my first portfolio photo is from Zion during the fall. It's a photo of Subway, which is a quite iconic scene in the park. And I tried to photograph it in 2009, but that photo didn't turn out so great, so I went back in 2010 and was able to take that photo. But if you look at 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, it's all pretty similar. Either 1, 2, or 3 photos from those years, but not really big numbers. And the scenes that I did photograph that are in my portfolio, they're mostly the grand scenes, the iconic scenes, photos of the Narrows, photos of Subway, stuff of that sort, the more obvious sort of subjects. In 2012 and 2013, I started finding some subjects of my own, which I'm still quite happy with to this day. So that was kind of a little deviation from these bigger scenes, right? But between 2014 and 2015, you'll notice that there's a significant change there. Now, I believe that 2015 was the year that they changed the timing of the shuttle that goes up the main canyon. Because during the kind of late spring through fall time, there's a mandatory shuttle up the main canyon, but during the off season, you can drive your private vehicle. And in years past, I believe it was the final Sunday of October was the last day of the mandatory shuttle. And then after that, you could drive your private vehicle. And they were going to do that in 2015, just as they had in years past, but I think visitation was especially high that year. And so they decided to delay that, probably for very good reason, because it would have been just really just it would have been chaos in the main canyon. I was bummed at the time because I was looking forward to being able to drive up the main canyon. You go up there early in the morning, have the place to yourself, very convenient. But when that got delayed, then it really forced me to spend some more time in other parts of the park. And primarily the east side. The east side of the park, it is chaos. You don't have these big iconic scenes like you do in the main canyon or some other parts of the park. It really is just chaos. Rolling hills of slick rock with trees, and there's some washes, and there's some maples. And I always had a really hard time with it because there wasn't really obvious subjects over there, at least in the way that I was accustomed to when I was looking for those bigger scenes. But that year in 2015 forced me to spend some time there, and I walked away with more than double the number of photos I had in the previous year. So I'm like, maybe there's something to this. And so that was the start of the learning process of really looking for those smaller scenes. And you see that trend continued in 2016. 2017 was a bit of an odd year. I have 2 photos from that year, but I am very, very happy with those 2 photos. And those 2 photos are from the main canyon. And they're scenes that I found on my own, as opposed to these grand scenes. But 2018 was also a little bit of a quiet year as far as photos. I'm super satisfied now. 2019 kicked up a little bit. 2020 was a little quiet. We all know what happened in 2020. The park was a madhouse. There was way too many people there. There was graffiti. There was trash left all over the place. And it's really hard to be in that mindset of trying to photograph nature when you're just surrounded by all that. So I didn't have a great year in 2020, no surprise. But 2021, look what happened there. So I'm going to update this chart with 2 lines that are going to designate changes in this timeline. So I already talked about the change between 2014 and 2015 when I started really concentrating more on the smaller scenes. And then in 2021, well, that was the first year I was doing photography full-time as a career. And there's some other stuff that comes along with that. There's more pressure that's involved. And because basically my livelihood does depend on it. So I think that year in particular, coming back from the pandemic, having more pressure on my shoulders in terms of having to produce work I'm very happy with, I pushed myself very hard that year in the field, and it did pay off. I mean, I have 6 photos from that year that I'm very, very satisfied with. And that trend continued in 2022, 5 photos, 2023, 8 photos, 2024, 9 photos. Now, 2025, I'm still getting to know the images, but it's gonna be very similar to 2024, probably 9 or 10 photos I'm very, very satisfied with. So you see this change in 2021 where now I'm having to rely on this for a living, which does push me to work harder, but that does also take away a little bit of the experience in the field, because there's times when, you know, after just especially a week in the field, you kind of get tired, kind of get worn out, and I end up pushing myself too hard on these trips, and I don't rest and relax as much as I should, which is something I really want to get better at. But also, I think when I'm in the field, I just kind of tell myself, well, when I get home, then I can rest and relax. But looking back at those early years, 2009 through 2014, I was not terribly productive. I spent as much time in the field as I do on the trips now. And I look back, and I don't know if it's just the sort of thing where you look back, you only remember the good times. But I look back at that as a time of wonder, a time of awe, a time of spending time out in nature. And I don't have quite that same experience now, which I think is just because of the pressures that come with it. But again, it's something I do want to get a little better at. But I figured this information would be interesting for those of you who may be curious about it. Maybe you've been returning to the same location for a few years in a row, and maybe you're being productive, maybe you're not. But just know that, you know, for the first 6 years I visited Zion in the fall, I only walked away with a handful of photos each year, maybe 2 or 3 photos a year. But then it wasn't really until 2021 that I really started being far more productive in the field. And people will sometimes say, you know, why do you keep returning to the same location again and again? As though I'm sitting there looking at the exact same subject again and again and taking a picture of the exact same subject again and again. And the truth is that the more you visit a location, the deeper you dig into that location, the more you're going to find. And I think that is why it's fascinating to look at these numbers and the fact that it took a while to get things going, whether it was picking up different skill sets through the years, learning to find different sort of subjects. But it really does pay off to visit that same location again and again, because you find new things each time and you really get to know the area. You get to predict things a little bit more. You anticipate things a bit more. So I thought this was fascinating, but in the coming weeks, I will be able to start sharing the videos from this year's visit. Now, of course, you guys know that I have about 10 photos I'm quite satisfied with, so might be a good series. But I want to thank everyone for watching. We'll see you around next time.